Hi everybody, Rad Mom here. Welcome back to the channel where today we're asking the big questions. Did feminism break society? That's what Baggage Claim said in her new video, I think yesterday. This came out at the perfect time for me, so thank you. Misha, I think her name is, over at Baggage Claim. Boy, this was a doozy too. We're only actually going to be responding to about 6 minutes of like a 20-minute video because it is packed. But her main point is how feminism broke society, which is a big claim. Let's see if she makes it.
Feminists would argue that we are far from equality. Well, the feminist Shulamith Firestone has a suggestion, as she laid out in her book, published in 1970, The Dialectic of Sex. Firestone believed that true equality could only be achieved when the following conditions could be created in society through the intervention of science. 1. Social gender norms are removed. 2. Men and women are made to look physically indistinguishable. 3. The nuclear family is eradicated. 4. Babies are not carried by women, but rather grown in little pods, thus freeing women from the burdens of motherhood.
So this is already chapter 3 of her video, because the first half of it is like the history of feminism, and we all know that, plus her catty commentary, which we don't need, because we have mine. So we skip to chapter 3. The feminist vision for society is credited to one Shula Smith Firestone, who, what a name is that, huh? I know I've never heard that name before. I've heard the name of her book, The Dialectic of Sex. Apparently it is still taught in feminist studies classes to this day, and I believe that because it sounds a lot like Judith Butler. I looked this woman up. I learned so much making these videos. Her later life was pretty tragic. She was diagnosed paranoid schizophrenic and later died of neglect, essentially. So, on the one hand, that is extremely tragic. And on the other hand, if her ideas sound a little kooky, that might be why. And she went by Shuli in her life. And I think that Baggage Claim here has picked Shuli to pick on her. It's reasonable to suspect that maybe she wasn't in quite her right frame of mind when she came up with some of these ideas. So aside from sounding very sci-fi, and yet also strangely familiar, this also sounded familiar to me because these sound like Bolshevik ideas. Alexandra Kollontai was a member of the Bolshevik Revolution, and she said a lot of stuff very like this. This is classic communist stuff based on the idea of Marx and Freud kind of applied to feminism, which, as I've said before, I don't necessarily think those apply to feminism, and this is part of why.
She also believed that children should not be raised by their biological parents, but rather by groups of unrelated adults.
Some of the things that this woman, Shulamith Firestone, wrote are, things about how, like, the taboo of incest needs to be put away and stuff like that. So this is precisely the kind of crap that conservatives are complaining about lefties, all right? I really feel that this woman was cherry-picked as an example of the most easily hateable sort of radical feminist. And I've noticed some confusion lately over this term, radical feminist. I sort of claim ownership. I claim a little bit of authority. Why am I an authority over radical feminism? Because I say so. Because I have done the research and I have the experience to back that up. And I talk about it on the channel all the time. And people seem to just throw these words around as if they don't mean anything.
It all sounds outlandish until you realize that we are headed in a frighteningly similar direction, and the nuclear family is in tatters. Feminism has convinced women everywhere that their role at the office is far more important than their role as a mother. Many women, encouraged by examples like Samantha Jones, are choosing to stay single, stay childless, and as Samantha would say, fabulous.
The way Samantha Jones behaves is self-absorbed regardless of what your sex or your gender presentation is.
And trans woman Dylan Mulvaney is eagerly awaiting for signs to make it possible for Dylan to be impregnated by a woman.
Never say never.
Never.
They're closer than ever to Firestone's vision for society.
But is Firestone's vision for society arguably feminism's vision of society? And I have never heard of this woman. I'm not saying that she's not well known, because I don't get out much, and I didn't go to college for this stuff. But she's not exactly the biggest thought leader in modern feminism. That's all I'm saying. If I've never heard of her. Beginning a few years later, she had a long-term struggle with mental illness. And I do not mean to lay any shame on mental illness. However, she's not very well known. Arguably, there may be a reason why some of her ideas are a little outlandish. Unfortunately, I have to say, I would argue that Shulamith Firestone does not represent the main school of thought of modern feminism, really, in any way. Like I say, she sounds like the Bolsheviks from 100 years ago.
And yet, we aren't much closer to a utopia. In fact, society seems to be falling apart. So if the nuclear family is to be blamed for society's ills, as many radical feminists would claim, why is it that we are at our most destabilized culturally today when the nuclear family is at its weakest?
I think she actually makes a pretty strong argument for the nuclear family here, but not straight marriage, which is kind of funny.
The displacement of the stable family environment has had devastating impact on the individual and, in the process, our society.
And like we all know this, these statistics are well known. She quotes a lot of stuff. Go watch her original video. I will link it down below. She quotes a lot of statistics that to me are well known, like as an 80s, 90s kid, okay? The idea that children of broken homes from a single parent household do worse in life is pretty well established. We're not going to argue that point. But single parent, okay?
Firestone's assertion that it would be greatly beneficial that children should be raised away from their biological parents is categorically false.
It's also not necessarily a feminist assertion. And this is where I'm going to assert my definition of feminism, which is stuff that helps women, okay? If you're doing something that hurts women and calling it feminism, that's wrong.
Turns out, after countless research done on this matter, children raised by both their parents, even of the same gender.
Aha! By both their parents, even of the same gender. You mean same sex, okay? They wanted so badly to use this against the gays, right? Well, gays can't raise kids. Yes, they can. Yes, they can. And the stats back that up, don't they? That what you need to successfully raise a productive member of society is a team. A cohesive team. And it doesn't matter the sexual makeup of that team. That's what they found. So if you're going to be doing the parenting thing, it works best as a team sport. That doesn't prove the argument she's making.
Have a far greater likelihood to be well-adjusted and mentally healthy compared to those raised by single parents, something Melissa Kearney discusses in great detail in her book, Two-Parent Privilege. So, what caused this catastrophic shift in family dynamics? Was it feminism? Well, believe it or not, it was the advent of birth control and the legalization of abortion. Before the 1960s, in America, if a man got a woman pregnant, it was societally expected of him to marry her.
If he admitted it, ooh, this part made me so angry. What's she gonna do? A paternity test? All he's got to say is, I don't know her, she crazy. I don't know her like that, she lying. That's all he has to do. And who is society already biased towards? Who are they going to believe? Add into that the power imbalance that probably helped get her into that situation in the first place, and it is a foregone conclusion. Forget rape. This made me so angry.
But once women were given the choice to terminate the pregnancy, it also gave men the choice to abandon their responsibility.
No. Nature gave them that choice. And they have decided to abuse that privilege for their own benefit for eons. That's what we're talking about, remember? And this is part of how they've done it. They behave as if their choices are just the assumed rational choice, but women's choices always need to be explained.
This is a common argument you hear today where people cite the multiple forms of contraception that are available to women, wondering why then a man should be forced to be financially and emotionally responsible for children.
Yeah, you're right. Women have a choice. Why should men have morals or ethics?
That he had no choices in conceiving.
Had no choices in conceiving? Boy, you were there.
Turns out they're both wrong, but both sides are reacting to each other. The initial women's rights movement was a response to a male-dominated society that insisted that women should exist as silent support acts for their men.
Finally! The idea that the women's rights movement is reacting to something, it's really funny, because she pays lip service to the patriarchy, but then turns around and behaves as if it never existed.
But as they gained more and more successes and actually achieved equal status for women,
when was that exactly?
They chose to keep going, and the underlying motivation evolved from righting a wrong to exacting revenge.
That you would pick on this one woman who wrote a book 50 years ago and then sit here and try and claim that the narrative has become more aggressive, which, given that this book was published over 50 years ago, I don't know that you've demonstrated here. But most cultural narratives have become more aggressive over the last 50 years, right? If anything, it's just keeping pace. Maybe feminism in particular has found its true goals to be maddeningly difficult to achieve.
The narrative shifted from equality for women to down with men.
She does this a couple of different times here. We're looking at signs that say down with patriarchy. Honey, patriarchy does not equal men. I know that this is a bit of subtlety. I know that this is a bit of a nuance here. But really, try harder.
And men became the focal point of all the hatred. The feminist movement sought to convince the world that every single ill in society was because of men, and that by simply existing, men led privileged, easy lives. They became the ultimate villains, not a group of people to reconcile with, but an oppressive class that needed to be vanquished, or at the very least, dominated.
This is a very flat, black and white, pathological interpretation of feminist thought.
This understanding of men could not be further from the truth.
And I don't know about that. Like, some men are scary and do awful, evil things. That part's true.
Historically, some men have enjoyed the privileges of being at the top of the hierarchy in the form of money, power, and influence. But the privilege a king or president has enjoyed is far different from a serf.
Oh, yeah, some of them were kings, but a lot of them were serfs. And how many of those serfs had a wife that they could beat if they felt like it?
But to claim that because most leaders throughout history have been men means all men have enjoyed all boons of society.
Nobody is fucking saying that.
Is as misguided as assuming that all women are inherently good.
Anyone who is saying anything remotely like this is mistaken and painting with a brush so broad as to be utterly meaningless.
In fact, it's men who have always been considered the disposable group.
What the fuck are you talking about? They didn't want to teach women to read and write. They didn't want to educate girls because it might encourage them to think. Women didn't even used to be taught to read and write so that we could write down our own thoughts because our thoughts were not worth recording. Who the fuck has always been the disposable ones? Oh my god, this shit makes me so angry.
Always placed on the front lines of the most uncomfortable aspects of society.
Uncomfortable like childbirth? Uncomfortable like housework? Like drudgery? Endless fucking faceless, mindless drudgery? Like, what are you talking about? Talking about a dead-end job.
Whether it's down in the trenches of warfare or up on the power lines, it's their willingness to put their lives on the line that have kept the gates guarded, the streets safe, and the power running.
Now, this, I will say, the refusal to acknowledge differences between men and women does necessitate ignoring any good stuff about men. That is true. I can see how that might be a little aggravating after a while, especially if you are one.
But the feminists refuse to acknowledge any of that. They refuse to acknowledge that it's the patriarchy that keeps the lights on.
Excuse me, it is the patriarchy who decided we needed to power the lights with shit that's poisoning the planet.
And it's the spread of this intense disdain that has poisoned the relationships between men and women.
But where the fuck did it come from?
In their relentless push for female freedom, feminists have successfully destroyed a fundamental belief system among their followers, the sanctity of life.
That's not true. That's not why women aren't having children. Women aren't having children because they're expensive. Valuing that life would mean giving it a decent one. And if you can't afford to do that, if you can hardly afford to feed yourself, most abortions are had by women who already have children for this very reason.
Wherever you land on the issue of abortion, it's hard to deny that radical feminists almost relish in the carnage that the act requires.
I categorically deny that. Lena Dunham is not a radical feminist. Lena Dunham is a notorious lib femme. And an obnoxious one at that. And we kind of have the same hairdo. Someone with radical extremist politics who goes around calling themselves a feminist is not a radical feminist. No.
And inviting the opportunity to undergo such a procedure to make their point. And it's on points like these that the feminists found themselves aligned with Hugh Hefner, who used his influence in Playboy to support legalizing abortion and birth control.
Gee, I can't imagine why a guy like Hugh Hefner would have wanted women to have birth control and abortions. I don't think he was acting in those women's best interests. I think, as always, he was acting in his own best interests. Obviously.
Proclaiming himself to be a feminist, he was accepted into the circle with open arms. After all, he was advocating for the same sexual freedom for women that the feminists were calling for.
Again, Misha's got a point there. If you find yourself aligning with someone like that, there may be something amiss somewhere.
He was advocating for the same sexual freedom for women that the feminists were calling for, the right to have sex like a man.
Why wouldn't we want to have sex like a man, right? They seem to have such fun. A lot of addicts say that, though, don't they? Why in the hell would we want to have sex like men exactly? Why? Did no one question this idea?
Equal responsibility belongs to feminism, that has tried to convince women that we can in fact have sex like men, and that any discomfort we feel in engaging in casual sex or participating in being sexually objectified should be pushed down, because the cause of that discomfort is not biological, but societal. This is false.
Personally, I do suspect that the cause of that is somewhat biological, in that psychology is somewhat biological, but we have no idea. And even if it is just somehow society weighing on you, we should still talk about that. It might still be a valid objection to not want to be some dude's wank material.
And a simple pill that was created merely 60 years ago is not going to change million years of biology.
No, but it sure does affect it pretty strongly, because apparently it changes who you're attracted to. Can we talk about that?
That in a world content with demonizing men for every aspect of their masculinity and convincing women that any form of real-world male attention is akin to harassment, it only seems reasonable that many men will look for their sexual needs virtually.
There's a whole lot of assumptions in those couple of statements, right? I think that a lot of them go and look for their jollies digitally because they can. Because they feel entitled to do that because it's easier. I really do think that.
So it would seem that in 60 years, radical feminism has turned women into sexualized objects disconnected from their biology and any emotional connection.
Yeah. Feminism did that. If it hurts women, it's not feminism. I don't give a fuck what you call it.
And men into passive voyeurs brimming with self-loathing.
Passive voyeurs? Men are told to look to themselves as the romantic standard. Like, why are straight women told to behave like men? Straight men don't want to date men? No wonder these men are confused. No, I think men have turned themselves into passive voyeurs because it's easier.
While any real-world relationship between the sexes have been completely destabilized.
This is apparently the case. Apparently it's a jungle out there in the dating world. I wouldn't know. I've not had to go on a date with somebody I wasn't already in a relationship with in a very long time. From what I gather from younger friends and relations, it's kind of insane out there. And a lot of it has to do with like a culture clash between men and women that's already present by the time they're teenagers.
This is the true damage of feminism. It took out the connection between men and women.
I'm sorry. Feminism took out the connection between men and women? See, this is what I'm talking about. She paid lip service to patriarchy and then is acting as if it never fucking happened. Girlfriend, do you suppose that the millennia of subjugation might have had something to do with breaking the connection between men and women? Which, by the way, you can't even do. Much to all of our chagrin. Because they feel like if you could actually do that, well, they would have done that a long time ago. There would be like man land and woman land. That's how we all would have grown up. Because they would have done that a long time ago. You can't actually sever the connection between men and women. But feminism is not the problem. Feminism is not the source of this animosity you're complaining about. It really has more to do with the way that men have twisted the situation to their own benefit and then convinced us to play along.
And now every child of a tumultuous divorced household as an adult walks around like a zombie, turning over the various aspects of his childhood that made him feel abandoned and unloved, a void being filled instead by therapy, a porn addiction, and a motley crew of friends he chooses to spend Christmas with because his dad is unreliable and his mom has a new husband he doesn't get along with.
Meanwhile, neglecting his own kids, right? You're describing that guy's dad, too. How the fuck do you think he rationalized that garbage?
What would happen if, as a society, we stop pretending that sex is a casual, animalistic act?
That's a good question. I've wondered that myself.
What if we all agreed that men and women bring complementary strengths to the table?
And see, this is where it starts to get obvious to me. We're only looking at a small portion of her video. She uses this word complementary several times. That rings a bell in my mind, right? Because we're talking about complementarianism. That's what she's arguing for here. You don't believe me?
Complementary strengths to the table that should be celebrated and supported and combined to create families that provide for healthy and eternally loved children.
Eternally loved children? Wait a minute. I thought we were talking about raising productive members of society. Eternally loved by whom? Right? Gee, I wonder. So she's trying to make the argument for complementarianism here, how you need a man and a woman to raise children And all people start as children, so, that's how you make a healthy society. I wonder why she left in the bit about same-sex couples. Because they could adopt a child and theoretically raise up a productive member of society just as well as the supposedly complementary straight couples. Why? If the complementary nature between men and women is the secret sauce, then why does gay parenthood work? It's a flaw in the logic. It doesn't make any sense because it's bullshit. No. Men and women bring different skills and strengths to the table. What you need are complementary personalities. We all know that just putting a man and a woman in a room is not a guarantee they're going to get along, is it? This is baby stuff.
I wonder then if we could undo the terrible impact that feminism has had on our lives. I wonder what heights our society could scale then.
Oh, I don't know. Probably the heights of patriarchy. What is this nonsense? How on earth you're going to sit there and pretend, just sit there and pretend that patriarchy never happened? I object to your use of the word feminism and your use of the term radical feminism because you're misusing both of them. Misha, you're just parroting the masculine narrative while straw-manning feminists so hard. Poor Shuli, she had to stand in for all of us, and she's not exactly equipped to do that. Some of the most classic straw-manning I've ever seen in that way. So yeah, in short, no. Feminism is a reaction to the thing that's actually fucked up society, which is the subjugation of women for the benefit of mankind. Right? For the benefit of everyone, women need to be breed chattel. No. Unless you can prove otherwise, I'm going to have to go ahead and say that men struck the first blow in this battle. I think we'd all like to see it end. But if feminism really breaks society, no. No, it didn't. But patriarchy sure is trying. I have been rad, Mom. Thank you so much for joining me for our little discussion of feminism and terminology. And I will see you at the top of the hour for the live stream and discussion where we can dig into all these very meaty topics. And next week on Wednesday with a brand new one. And I'll see you then. Have a good one. Bye.